Hello and welcome to the YouTube channel for craftworldeldar.com. I'm Brent and this is the unit focus video on Skyweavers. In these unit focus videos, I talk about what the unit is, its role on the table, obstacles to using it effectively, and how to play around those obstacles. Skyweavers are those pretty cool looking Harlequin bikes with two elves riding on the bike, one driving and one flourishing either a big glaive or a bola, a star bola, which is just a cool name for a sci-fi weapon, on the back of the bike. And let me start by just going on record as saying I love these things. I've always loved the models. I love seeing them on the table. But I also love how they play. I love what they can do for you. I've been including Skyweavers and a lot of mono Harlequin lists. I've been messing around with mono Harlequins to try to make that work in 10th edition. It's not easy. And as a result, I've really come around to Skyweavers not only as possibly the most essential workhorses of a mono Harlequin list, which I will talk about in an upcoming video at great length, much greater length than you horse dentists, busy horse dentists will want to tolerate, but also as an allied unit. Well, they're not allies anymore, but as a non-craft world include in my regular Eldari lists. They're very good and very efficiently pointed at 95 points, such that they are a solid target elimination and combat unit, but they are also cheap enough that they can be a scoring unit for all of those Leviathan secondary missions that require you to be in some particular place on the table. And they're also just cheap enough that if you really had to, you could even use an MSU squad of 2 to move block or something. But first and foremost, they're a target elimination unit that specializes in destroying vehicles and heavy and light infantry, but especially vehicles. Okay, let's take a look at the data card and talk loadout options as well as number of models in the squad. So Skyweavers have a 14-inch move, toughness 4, 4-up save, but also a 4-up invuln. The nice thing about having the 4-up save in addition to the 4-up invuln, of course, is that they can benefit from cover. They have 3 wounds, leadership 6, 2 objective control, which is nice. And so there's another little thing they can do. They're more helpful with objective control than they might otherwise be. For loadout options, there are two things one needs to make a decision about. So there's the underslung weapon on the bike, which can either be a shuriken cannon or a Skyweaver haywire cannon. And then the elf on the back of the bike can either have star bolas, or a star bola, or a zephyr glaive. Now, if you're running these things as in a craft world list, not in a mono Harlequin list, I'm telling you right now, you want the Skyweaver haywire cannon. There's really no reason, I don't think, to go with the shuriken cannon. If you were running mono Harlequins and you are running a bunch of squads of 4 of these things, there is an argument for putting a shuriken cannon in each of the squads. And when I do my big video on mono Harlequins, I'll talk about that. But in general, you're taking these things in large part for the haywire cannon. The haywire cannon is really, really good into vehicles. It has a 24-inch range, 2 attacks, hits on 3s, strength 3, but anti-vehicle 4-up and devastating wounds, -1 AP, flat 3 damage. So for you newer players, here's what this means. If you have 2 of these bikes in a squad, so they either come in squads of 2 or squads of 4. If you have even 2 of these bikes in a squad, they're putting out 4 shots, hitting on 3s, and then if they're targeting a vehicle, they wound it on 4s, and if they wound it, they just automatically do 3 damage for every wound, ignoring saves. And because of our detachment ability, they have 1 reroll to hit and 1 reroll to wound. So you're firing 4 shots with hitting on 3s with a reroll to wound, and then you're wounding on 4s with a reroll to wound, and every single one of those wounds is just going to go straight through. So statistically, you stand a really good chance with relatively average dice of just, with even 2 of these things, just doing 9 damage to a vehicle. On average, I think it averages out 2 of these to like 7.5 damage, but obviously that's not a real thing. It's either going to be 6 or 9. Now, when Uh, the index initially dropped. I looked at these things and I thought they were cool, pretty good, but I was a little skeptical about the Haywire cannon because it's only strength 3. I wanted it to be strength 4, so that when you're not targeting a vehicle with it, it has some legs. But here's what I found, right? Like, actually, it's kind of fine. Even if you find yourself having to target something with your Skyweavers that is not a vehicle, say it's a unit of enemy heavy infantry, oftentimes there are things in your opponent's army into which this is still reasonably efficient. So, for example, if you're playing into Chaos Space Marines and your opponent has a big block of 10 Chosen that have 3 wounds, you fire 4 shots at the Chosen, you're hitting on 3s with a reroll, and then you're only wounding on 5s, but you're wounding on 5s with a reroll. You probably hit at least 3 times. So you roll those dice, you get a reroll, and then it's -1 AP. Every failed armor save is a dead Chaos Space Marine. But also, if you rolled any 6s, and statistically you'll probably get at least 1, if you have the 3 rolls to wound with the reroll. Well, not probably get at least, but you stand a good chance of getting 1. It is more likely than not. That's just that's flat 3 devastating wounds. It's pretty good. And if they have to shoot some big monster, the ability to do devastating wounds on a 3, it's not terrible. And of course, you can always use a fate die to guarantee that this happens. Fate die are a much hotter commodity now than they used to be. That, we only have 6 of them, but it is an option. But of course, really where they shine is destroying vehicles. They are just so good, especially if you have several of them. I think if you're running these things as allies in a Craft Worlds list and you're doing the sort of the MSU build, if you're going to take 1 squad of 2, it's probably worth taking 2 squads of 2. And if you have like 4 of these things all targeting the same vehicle, they will really mess it up. And one of my most competitive lists right now, my most competitive Craft Worlds lists, I have 3 squads of 2 of these things, and I just love them. And again, it happened because I was messing around with mono Harlequins and they were just such workhorses in the Harlequin lists that I missed them when I was playing with my regular Space Elves. Okay, so you want the Skyweaver Haywire Cannon, not the Shuriken Cannon. Uh, the other decision you're making between the Starbola and the Zephyr Glaive, this is a slightly harder decision to make. I think in general you're going with the Starbolas. I do think that there's an argument for occasionally maybe including a Skyweaver squad that's outfitted with the Zephyr Glaives, or if you're running mono Harlequins and you're running big squads of 4, maybe you have one that's all Zephyr Glaives, or maybe one of your Bola squads has a Zephyr Glaive. The Zephyr Glaives do give you a much more meaningful melee profile, but in general, I think the math is just better on the Starbola. So here's the difference. The Starbola has a 12-inch range, so not great as a shooting weapon, but the bikes are so fast at 14 inches that it's not a big issue. You're probably not using them turn 1 unless your opponent got first turn and played aggressively into the midfield, you probably wouldn't be charging and using the Zephyr Glaive either unless that same instance were the case. So it's a 12-inch range, D3 attacks, so kind of unreliable there, but it's not bad. Hitting on 3s, strength 7, -2, flat 2. So 2 of these things will have 2d3 attacks with 1 reroll to hit, 1 reroll to wound at strength 7, -2, flat 2. So really good against heavy infantry, very good against killing Space Marines or whatever. But strength 7 is good because it gives you, against something like a light vehicle, you're still wounding it on a 3-up. And against something that's really tough, that stuff does 12, you're wounding it on a 5, not a 6. So the Starbola is a threat to pretty much everything and has just enough AP to matter, and it is a multi-damage weapon, and so it doesn't have a ton of shots. If you have 2 squads of 2 of these things, that's 4d3, strength 7, -2, flat 2. That's good. It's good, and it also gives you an opportunity to split your fire and have uh, your Haywire is going into one thing and your Starbola is going into some nearby heavy infantry or whatever. That's pretty powerful. Now, your other option, of course, also the Starbola, if you're if you're putting all of your shooting into one thing, the Starbola has a profile such that it too, because it's dangerous to vehicles, if your haywire cannon didn't quite do it, uh, your Starbolas may finish off the target. The Zephyr Glaive is also pretty solid. It has 4 attacks, which is obviously better than D3. Melee only, hitting on 3s, strength 5, nice. So even strength 4 heavy infantry, you're still wounding on 3s. -1 AP, cool. Flat 2 damage. So pretty good against killing heavy infantry. I like the Zephyr Glaives. They've done reasonably well for me. I definitely think that if you have a bunch of Skyweavers from an earlier edition and they are built with Zephyr Glaives and Skyweaver haywire cannons, that's not bad. But I have found that the -1 AP, most heavy infantry is going to save on a 3-up, and because this is not a big squad where all of the attack characteristic of 4 is good, but because it's a bike squad of 2, it's like 8 attacks. This is not an infantry squad in which all the infantry have 5 attacks. So if you have 8 attacks and they're hitting on 3s and you have a reroll and maybe you hit 6 times and you wound 3 times, but then it's -1 AP, so the Space Marines or whatever are still saving 50% of the time. You pick up 1 or 2, but it's not actually a significant melee threat. And because it's not a significant melee threat, your Skyweavers don't really want to be bound up in melee because it's more of a shooting unit. So it's nice to have the Starbolas that they have slightly higher strength and slightly better AP, and yes, not as many shots, but they don't require you to commit to melee. But the Zephyr Glaive is better into light infantry, and if in the late game you're getting really aggressive with your Skyweavers, it's a better cleanup unit probably with the Zephyr Glaives, but I also find that my Skyweavers usually are not still alive in the late game, so I think the Bolas are overall the better loadout, but that one is a little bit more of a toss-up. Okay, they also have this ability, Scything Swipes. Each time this unit ends a normal move, you can select one enemy unit, excluding monster and vehicle units, that it moved over, so infantry and bikes. And if you do, roll 1d6 for each model in the unit, and for each 4+, the enemy unit suffers 1 mortal wound. It's not that crazy. If you have a unit of 2 bikes, on average you will do a mortal wound. If you have a unit of 4, on average you will do 2 mortal wounds. It's cool to remember that you have it. It's not useless. But it isn't really a major calculation in terms of thinking about the value of the unit or how you're going to use it either. One other detail of note on the data card is that the Skyweaver has the smoke keyword. The smoke keyword corresponds to one of the general stratagems, smoke screen, that is a little bit better than lightning fast. So it's 1 CP, you use it in your opponent's shooting phase, and in addition to getting stealth being -1 to hit, also you get the benefits of cover. So if it's a Skyweaver unit, if it's an enemy unit that doesn't have any AP, I guess the benefits of cover matter because now you're saving on a 3 instead of going up to your 4-up invuln. Being -1 to hit is good. It's also just nice that theoretically you could then also use lightning fast on something else. Lightning fast also works in melee, of course, and smokescreen doesn't. So there's that. But it's good. It's worth noting. Okay, in terms of how you're going to set this unit up and play with it on the table, I think generally you're going to look at your opponent's list and you are going to decide on the units that you want your Skyweavers to kill. If your opponent has some powerful target elimination vehicles, those are likely going to be the targets, especially if they're fast. One of the best ways to win as an Eldari player is to pick out the units that are both quick and have good damage output in your opponent's list and immediately destroy them. Because once you can outmaneuver your opponent, you should, in most matchups, stand a pretty good chance of winning. And Skyweavers are fast enough to get a bead on enemy vehicles to like go wide and be able to see around a piece of cover. And then they have the damage output, despite being a 95 point unit, they have the damage output to really mess those vehicles up, especially with the help of the Fate die. So as you're deploying, I would advise holding off deploying your Skyweavers until you see where your opponent places their ideal targets, but also they're fast enough that, and on many maps, it's probably not going to matter that much. It may be kind of obvious where you need to deploy them. Obviously, you deploy them out of line of sight. It may also be worth looking at secondary targets for them too, and trying to set things up so you can also get a beat on those once the primary targets are destroyed. And again, there's really nothing wrong, especially if you have several of these things, with also using them into things that are not vehicles, especially if those targets have exactly 3 wounds, because you may still roll into some devastating flat 3 damage attacks. I like to have Skyweavers kind of playing the flanks and using line of sight blocking terrain to prevent too many enemy units from being able to return fire at them, and that can be useful. Like most Harlequin units, Skyweavers can be weirdly durable, even though they're only T4 with 3 wounds, because they've got that invulnerable save. There's always a chance that they can be pretty resource intensive to eliminate and tough to get a beat on. Again, like Harlequin units, they typically don't like volume of fire, and smoke is a way to get around that. But again, don't put a ton of resources into trying to keep these things alive. It's only a 95 point unit, and one of the advantages to it, like the Warwalker, is that you don't really have to worry about losing it, but it may be sort of vaguely resource intensive for your opponent to get rid of. But also the unit's cheap enough that it's the same cost as a unit of Shadow Specters. It's less than a unit of Warp Spiders, a little more than Hawks. It's also fine to use your Skyweavers, and if you come up, again, I should probably be saving this for obstacles, but if you come up against an opponent that just doesn't have any vehicles, they're also a useful scoring unit. A full half of the cards, I think, in the Leviathan secondary mission deck involves some sort of like unit presence or unit presence and action based scoring, and Skyweavers are great for that. And so yeah, let's talk obstacles. So the greatest obstacle with Skyweavers is occasionally you will come up against lists in which they don't have any or very few optimal targets, in which case you just have to pivot a little bit in thinking about how you play with them. It's also worth considering that they can be pretty good into light infantry also, even if you don't give them the Zephyr Glaives, because they do have the regular close combat weapons on the bikes are okay. They have 4 attacks, so if if you were trying to take out a unit of gargoyles or something, they could shoot the unit of gargoyles, and when they charged it, the 8 melee attacks hitting on 3s and wounding on 4s might be enough to finish off the squad, especially if you scything swipe the squad first, and then they can fly around and perform actions. But even though their damage output is most optimal into vehicles, they still do work against other stuff, and you're never going to be sorry to have the mobility. You do have to be careful with them around enemy units that do flat 3 damage. So something like an Exocrine can be very efficient into eliminating these things. And you definitely don't want your opponent to charge you with anything that's a pretty decent melee unit, especially if it does flat 3 damage. But again, on the other hand, it's a 95 point unit, so if you get caught flat-footed and you lose it, it's not the end of the world. It's one of the reasons why Skyweavers are so great, is that they are kind of disposable. And actually, in going along with that, sometimes they kind of like draw enemy fire away from some of your more valuable units, because especially opponents who have vehicles, they just hate these things. And also the models look cool. They're kind of a big bike, and that guy on the back like spinning the thing around, if there are a few of them, they kind of look like they should cost more points than they do. And this can pull firepower and resources and just attention away from other units in your army that maybe should be higher priorities for your target to eliminate, your opponent to eliminate, excuse me, higher priority targets. And there's also value just in making your opponent make these kinds of decisions. Like, there are these really fast bikes that can be anywhere, and two of them just blew up one of my vehicles. Have to kill those, and then your opponent isn't thinking about your Avatar of Cain, or the fact that when he destroys your Skyweavers in melee, your Yin-Karn can show up there, or trying to get a bead on your fire prisms or whatever. They're really good. I am going to make the slightly controversial claim that as a unit that is allying into a Craft Worlds list, they are the best include after the Death Jester with Fate's Messenger. And they're not really comparable. They're in a totally different role, just in terms of their like raw competitive merit. The Solitaire, the Void Weaver, and the Troop Master are also very reasonable contenders for Harlequin allies, and it's possible that the Troop Master may have the edge on them, but for my money, it's the Skyweavers. They're my number 2 Harlequin unit in terms of raw competitive value for my playstyle, and they're also just my favorite, I think, Harlequin models physically. I just think they're super cool looking. Oh, and again, be sure when you're positioning these things for shooting to think separately about the Haywire cannons and the Star Bolas. It could be the case that there are multiple targets that they will be highly efficient into, but different targets for splitting your fire. And again, as allied units, I like to run them in 2s to maximize the detachment bonus and to just be able to assign resources more efficiently when you can trigger smaller numbers of units at a time, or models at a time, excuse me, spread out over more units. You can avoid overkill with your firepower. And there isn't really a stratagem other than Smokescreen that would reward you running them in a 4. But if you want to run the big squad, you definitely can. In my mono Harlequin lists, I love the big squads. So that's what I've got. If you have your own ideas about how to use Skyweavers effectively, please leave those in the comments below. If you're looking to add Skyweavers to your collection, my guess is you stand a reasonable chance of being able to find them on eBay right now. People aren't running a ton of Harlequin stuff, and I imagine there are a lot of secondhand models for sale, or wherever you buy your secondary market models. And for those of you who listened to the video and thought to yourself, Brent, I would love to run Skyweavers, they're so cool, but I can't possibly add Harlequins to my collection because painting the motley is well beyond my ability. And I say to you 2 things. 1, you do not have to paint the motley on Harlequins. Plenty of people do not paint the motley on the Harlequins. You can find lots of online painting guides. The other thing is you can actually go in with a pen and like kind of cross hatch it and then paint it in. Full disclosure, my Skyweavers are a commission job, so I'm a total hypocrite here. But I have freehanded some Harlequins in the past, and I do not have any special talent at freehanding. And this crosshatch thing, you can find online tutorials for it. It's pretty straightforward. You can get sort of a basic motley effect, and it's fine. Okay, that's what I've got. Back again soon with more content, including in the relatively near future, the big video on mono Harlequins. Until then, if you liked this video, I hope that you will click like. If you have not yet subscribed, I hope that you will subscribe. And if you are feeling truly generous and enthusiastic about the channel, you could become a patron. And for $3 a month, join my Discord and engage in playful elf banter and tactical elf discussion and get early access to some content and also just make me a little happier. Thanks, everybody. Take care. Good luck with your pointy ears.